So thank you and welcome everybody. Today at BI Talk Show we have Laura. She has a bachelor within the area of psychology, a master's in international business, and a PhD degree in negotiation. So I want to welcome Laura here today.
Thank you so much, Victor.
And I want to start off with asking, what is negotiation in its core, if you could define it?
Yeah, well, I think I love getting this question because I say negotiation is life.
Interesting.
A little bit much. But the point is, negotiation happens every day between all people, or not all people all the time. But the fact is that we are social animals and we are interdependent on one another. So that means that we can't achieve our goals alone. We have to achieve goals with the cooperation of other people. But people are unique and have different preferences. So what happens when I need you to achieve my goals, but you might not want that goal?
Right.
Then we start negotiating.
Right.
So when I say that it's everything or it's life, it happens all the time, it really is a core function in everyday existence because we are interdependent, we are social, and we do have different interests and preferences. So some of the basics of negotiation can help you in all levels of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a hard sell for negotiation.
Yeah. And is there any definition more like according to research? What have you guys found out in a more like the theory behind it?
Theory. Well, it's very interesting because a lot of the research on negotiation actually came from practice.
Oh,
They went out and they looked at negotiation and said, what's going on? How's it working? And then it was imported back into research to say, okay, how do we do this in practice?
Right.
So when we talk about negotiation, our definition is quite simple in many respects. It's when two or more parties are together or interdependent and are trying to reach a solution together.
Right.
And they might have partially different interests.
Right.
So this is our definition. So it's not just coordination, like, oh, we have to work together, oh, we want the same goal. No, we might have slightly different goals, and so we have to work together to achieve our goal. And the research says is that often we don't get there.
Right.
Often we don't get the best goal.
Right.
And why is that? And that's often because we have the wrong impression about what negotiation is.
Yeah.
We think it's about winning.
Right.
When it's really about collaborating.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because essentially it's about getting something that you want, maybe getting a
and
goal
you can't
to
get
happen.
it by yourself.
And you can't get it by yourself.
You need me.
Right. And some people would say one form of doing that is diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
And then one form maybe is warfare, like through terror, right? But then in between.
No, we don't say that.
No. But you could, right?
Of
Some
course.
people do that.
If you have different interests, yes, there's alternatives to negotiation. Absolutely. And one is power or persuasion or pushing. Yeah.
But negotiation is a bit more a stronger form of diplomacy.
Well, we could use the word diplomacy, but it's really about, I'm interested in getting a high joint outcome. I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the ideal agreements, if we were to be normative, it's that I care about your outcome and I care about mine.
Right.
So then we try to find solutions together.
Yeah.
If I don't care about your outcome, then I might use power, although
Right.
it's often not an effective way to reach agreement,
Right.
because those agreements won't be implemented or
Right.
they'll be forced.
Yeah, they'll be
So we
forced.
can also argue that negotiation is a better route anyway. It's more likely we'll have a lasting agreement.
I understand.
Yeah.
Are there any examples you can give concerning good and bad negotiation or good and bad negotiators?
Am I allowed to use names?
No, probably not.
No. Well, I think if we're a bit academic here, what we can say, it's a bad negotiation if there's still money on the table. Is if we reach an agreement where it could have been much better.
Right.
So we only distribute fixed resources rather than trying to expand the pie and create more resources. We could talk about a bad negotiation when we say yes to an agreement that's worse than our alternatives. Underneath our reservation point.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're going for a job interview and you say no to a job and it's actually better than your other alternatives, your other job offers. So we can talk about bad negotiations using an economic model to say, hey, have we achieved as many resources as we could have? Have we gone underneath our reservation point?
Yeah.
Have we hurt relationships? That's another way we can measure a bad negotiation.
Right.
A good negotiation, I would say, is when both parties or all parties are satisfied, more or less, and the agreement is implemented.
Right.
And no other third parties are hurt.
Right.
You know, because we have to think about others outside of the negotiation as well.
It's really interesting what you talk about reference point. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we talk about reservation point or reference point. It's but when you're calculating, and this is really important when you're going out to work and salaries, is that you have a clear idea of what you're willing to accept.
Right.
What we would say the reservation point.
Expectancy?
Yeah, well,
kind
not
of like,
more
what
than
am I
expectancy.
worth?
Yeah, well, we can have goals. They might be higher, but what is it we're willing to accept?
Right, right.
And that should be based on what are our alternatives. So we need to do an analysis before we go into a negotiation, thinking about what is it we really want, so our goals, how many different issues, and what are we willing to accept.
It's kind of, okay, like when you go to a job interview, what value do I carry? Like, what am I expecting?
That could be part of your selling.
Yeah, it's kind of like, let's say a fun example can be like choosing a partner. It's like, you know, like how worth am I?
What's my relational value?
Yeah, what's my relational value? Try to meet that, and that's my expectancy level, and I can try to reach for, you know, it's a...
Yeah, and I'd say, okay, that's part of the background, and think about that. Think about your value, but whenever we're doing negotiation, we have to think about what we want, what's important to us, and what our alternatives are. But we also have to think about the other party. So you go into that job interview and you think, hey, I've got high relational value, or I've got high instrumental value. That's only if the other party values that, wants that type of competency or skill. So our analysis is about ourselves and also about the other party.
I understand.
So we have to find out, what do they want? What's most important for them?
I understand. Are there any differences of ways of negotiation between gender? Have you noticed that? Are there big differences there?
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. It's really interesting because about the turn of the century we started talking about, because a lot of research, gender wasn't looked at it explicitly, and I get so nervous because the minute we talk about gender, it's like, what is a man and what is a woman?
No, we don't need to go in depth
we
like
could,
that.
and we could say cis and trans and how the fluidity.
No, we don't need to make it problematic.
Because when we talk about who is the woman, are you thinking about like Steve Jensen, the Prime Minister? Are you thinking about me? Are you thinking about...
women? Yes, Steve is a woman, you're a woman, women and men.
Well,
I'm
she's
a man.
not the Prime Minister, right? I got that one wrong. It's Erinus, right? But anyways, but there's so many different types of women and age and profession.
Okay, I understand. But
so I feel reluctant.
Is it a hard...
Well, we have looked at some of the research that looks at, are there gender differences? And even though there might not be true differences like inherent in being male and female that makes us different negotiating, you will be treated differently often if you're male or female, depending on the context. There are different stereotypes for men and women. That can affect the negotiation. There's socialization and gender roles. So for example, as a woman, if I'm pushing for a higher salary, there might be some social costs to that. That you might judge me a little bit more negatively than if I'd been a man. So gender affects negotiation. There has been some research, are men or women better? Who's better, men or women? And then it depends on the type of negotiation. Is it a competitive one? Are we looking at economic outcomes? Are we looking at subjective outcomes or social psychological outcomes? But there are some patterns, and some of the patterns are correlated very highly with gender roles.
Can I you know, I think something when we talk about like differences in payment, in income for men and women, but could it be that like men have a tendency to negotiate more for their pay?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and actually some of the research in the States says that. They came out, one of the first books that came out on gender and negotiation, like a serious one in about 2001, they looked at exactly this question, and the title of the book was Just Ask. You know, because women aren't asking.
No, maybe
because
men
they're
take more
social
risks.
Yeah, well, they could take more risks, but it might be also society allows it. Like you're allowed to do it. I'm not. So there is something there, but they found though if women started asking, there could be these social costs because they weren't supposed to ask. So it is complicated, but what I will say is I recommend to everybody, try and negotiate.
Well, of course.
And there are different ways we can do it to keep the relationship, so you don't think I'm too greedy as a woman or whatever it might be. I can balance it.
Maybe people don't think that. Maybe people should see themselves as individuals, and as an individual, it's my responsibility to negotiate for my money.
And then a smart negotiator knows an individual as a woman or man will be interpreted differently. And the great thing about negotiations, which I said in the beginning, that it happens in all areas of our life at all levels, we can start practicing. And I really recommend with students today, go out and start practicing getting comfortable asking. You
Right.
are allowed to ask.
Yeah.
Go into shops and ask for discounts.
Right.
Start there.
Right.
And what we see is that
This is important stuff.
Yeah, this is really important because experience, we get uncomfortable and we feel a bit silly and we get over it. I know, how can we ask? But my students, I've been teaching negotiations for over 16, 17 years
Yeah.
here at BI,
Yeah.
from executives to more bachelor students,
really?
so a whole range of people.
Yeah.
And it's about realizing, just learn to ask and learn about that social interaction
Yeah.
because this is where the art comes in.
Yeah.
I can use humor or kid around or
right.
be persuasive. So there's many different ways, but you won't, what I will say is you'll never get a raise without asking.
Right,
You know?
right.
You're not going to get the great career jobs without asking. You've got to learn to ask, know what you're asking for, and know how to package it.
A closed mouth does not get fed.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
not bad,
I
not
was
bad.
going to ask you, have you noticed any differences? Because you're from Canada.
Really, yeah.
And you're currently living in Norway. Is there
Yeah.
any difference? Have you noticed ways like as people, do they negotiate differently? Do you think there's a difference in nations of negotiating?
You know how I was kind of talking about gender, saying, ooh, don't want to go to the stereotypes. I don't want to go there either.
Oh,
Get in
come
there.
on.
You want me to put in a box. Well, I mean,
but-
culture can influence. But the question is, when you say Norway and Canada, are we talking Northern Norway
Oh,
or
no.
Bergen?
No,
are we
I'm-
talking French Canada? Or are
I'm
we
trying to-
talking Vancouver?
Don't problematize this. Just simplify it.
Well, I think we have to, a good negotiator will always be aware of the other party's culture,
Okay.
and there can be different styles.
Right.
For example, you ask people, do you lie in a negotiation?
Yeah, yeah.
And some people go, oh no, I'd never lie. And other people go, of course, that's part of lying. Or and then
part of
other people say, what's a lie?
Yeah.
This is a game, you know.
Yeah.
So we have to be aware how culture can impact.
Yeah.
But when I meet you, and I know you're Swedish,
Half Swedish, I'm half Brazilian.
Okay. Which half would I negotiate with?
Right.
But the point is, you know I'm Canadian, and that will change our behavior anyways.
Okay, towards each
Yeah,
other. We
and,
take that
but
into
sometimes
account.
we become more stereotypically Canadian or Brazilian or Swedish in the interaction. So Canadians and Norwegians, there will be differences. If I were to do some gross generalizations, I'd say that Norwegians could be better at asking.
Oh,
you know,
nice,
with
yeah.
the culture about you shouldn't think you're somebody, you're too special.
Right.
You know, you're allowed to ask and demand for higher wages and better job opportunities.
Just to wrap this up a little bit, I wanted to come into the core of like the whole concept for why we're here, and that what are some good tips for students in their future careers to know when it comes to negotiation? What would you say is important for us? Because negotiation is such an essential part of life, as you said. Do you have any interesting tips that we can leave?
Well, first of all, I think there are some really good sites on the internet that could be helpful for students. Like, for example, Margaret Neal has some YouTube talks about negotiation. You've got the Harvard program on negotiations. You can subscribe to newsletters, which can be very helpful. And there are some very good books by Lee Thompson and some Getting to Yes, one of the basics. And I'd say take a look at this material and make sure it's the research base, because we test out things like who should go first, what happens when you lie, building trust. Research helps guides us. Doesn't
Okay.
give us the answer, but helps guide us. So my tip is to get comfortable negotiating.
Yeah.
Start thinking about the premises, and the main points are to know what you want,
Yeah.
to have a systematic structure. You're not born a good negotiator, you become one.
Yeah.
So to know what you want and know what the other party wants. So I strongly...
I forgot to ask that if
yeah.
it was a born skill or
No,
developed
no.
through practice. It's developed through
that's
practice.
the old way of
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah.
Like some of the recent political leaders who think they're great because they have this
Born.
charisma, born
Yeah,
great,
yeah,
and
born
it's like
blessed.
good negotiators. You don't reveal everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you plan, You plan what you want, what the trade-offs are, what the other party wants, and you build your power.
Yeah.
To build power in a negotiation, get alternatives. I don't want to be too dependent on you.
The dependency theory, you want to be as independent as possible to have a
Yeah.
good negotiation point.
Well, you'll have more power.
You'll have more
if
power.
you're more dependent on me, if you're an
yeah,
employer,
that decreases my power.
yeah, and increases mine.
So yeah, just to wrap it up a little bit, a good negotiation between parties is when everybody has at least reached their reference point, and that's where yeah, the lowest you can go, and that the negotiation is implemented, the practice that you guys were negotiating. And some good inspiration or learning material would be Margaret Neal on
Professor,
YouTube,
yeah.
and the Harvard program online. Is that an
Yeah,
online?
on negotiations,
On
pawns.
negotiation.
Yeah, they have a newsletter.
And the book Getting to Yes by
Yeah, Fisher and Yuri.
Fisher and Yuri.
And Yuri also has some fun YouTube. But
Okay.
go, if you're searching on the internet, there's a lot of good material, but look for the professors in the field rather than just consulting firms.
Okay, and last thing, practice in the stores. Just ask for
Yes.
unnecessary things and absurd
Double dare
prices.
you.
And just like be absurdly like, yeah, just like.
You'll be surprised how many discounts you get because people sometimes they're a little flummoxed
Yeah,
and
they're
they'll
like,
say,
yeah,
okay, sure.
Yeah. All right.
Ask for it.
Thank you so much, Lara,
You're
for
welcome,
being here.
Victor. Yeah,
Really
thank you
nice
for
to have
inviting me.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah? It's a take? Aren't you supposed to have one of those?